Hello and welcome to Surveyor Says, the podcast from the National Society of Professional Surveyors. Each week, we bring you fascinating guests that are involved in the profession of surveying. We cover a lot of ground, including Table A Talk with Gary Kent, Point of Order with the NSPS Joint Government Affairs Team, Future Focus, highlighting current and future leaders of the profession, and everything survey-related in between. Thanks for joining us here on the podcast, and hope you enjoyed listening to this episode of Surveyor Says. Hello and welcome to another episode of Surveyor Says. This is your host, Tim Burch. And yes, still on the road. Decided to spend a little extra time in New York City. After my trip to the college and meeting the students, you know what? I decided to hang out with Professor Morrison for a little bit. And we've got a lot of stuff to talk about, but one of the things that we really wanted to catch up on is the surveyor's role in our infrastructure, with the future. I mean, we've got so much we need to rebuild. There's so much that's been really touted in the press, and in our the public and the budgets and all these things. What needs to be built and rebuilt and all these things. But we're also not talking about the future though, and some of the stuff with climate change and other opportunities for surveyors. So I guess that's the reason I wanted to stick around, because Lem Morrison is the guest, and he's got an extensive amount of experience here in the New York, New Jersey area, East Coast. And I'm curious to hear, Lem, from your perspective, really where are things at along the East Coast, and I guess give a little bit of your background on why this is such a hot topic for the future of surveying.
Well, thanks, Tim. I think it's an incredibly hot topic. The things that are going on here, because there's so much that had to change, and so much that has to be built. First I want to lay out a little bit about my background, and that is that throughout my career, I've focused on engineering surveying, if you will, as opposed to the residential surveying. I just recently went to the RPA assembly and was talking with some engineers there, and they talk about, what do you do? And they say, a surveyor. Well, is that like a house? Or sometimes they're out of touch with perhaps what we do, and that's the popular version. I think that's how most people intersect with surveyors, is buying and selling a property.
Right.
And they're not making any more of it. So so it's people say there's not much land left in the East, or especially in Manhattan. That's true everywhere. They're not making any more land. It's just so much more valuable in this congested area.
Right.
So in my career, what I focused on is the built environment, providing the topo plans, the high detailed, high value surveys, showing the physical, showing the utilities they're there but we can't see them, and of course the boundaries, and them being very, very precise. And so the projects that I've worked on have been servicing infrastructure, servicing new parks, turning brownfields, turning disused into new parks. That's been a great area to be in. And then also taking properties that are underutilized and turning them to the highest and best uses. So it's still doing some surveys as we might know them, but for big commercial, big industrial spaces. And that's been the industry that I've focused on through most of my career. So it seemed like I got started there. One, I'm kind of a trained nerd infrastructure guy anyway, but when I was in college at Ohio State in the early 90s, one of our professors, John Bosler, had left the NGS and was there teaching at Ohio State. And he would say, you guys are going to have amazing careers. We have built so much in the post-World War II generation. We've built roads, and we've built water and infrastructure and all these things, and we're not investing any more in it. We've deferred maintenance through the 80s and the 90s, and he says, you guys are going to have to rebuild that. Well, 30 years have passed.
Yeah, exactly.
And we still haven't invested in all of that. So that's what drew me into the industry. I like it anyway, but I thought there would be a profound amount of work. There's been work, but maybe not as profound as a young thing thought at the beginning of his career.
Unfortunately, that bill's coming due.
That bill is coming due, and we're seeing it in the Inflation Reduction Act. A lot of spending that's happening, and in fact is going to happen. The boom times we've seen, and these are boom times, are still a lot of COVID catch-up, a lot of, so some of the COVID funding, a lot of that big infrastructure money, the big infrastructure we're used to seeing. The roads you drove on the way here, the bridges that you crossed, the trains that we're riding on, all these things haven't been invested in for more than a generation.
Oh, exactly. Well, and it's interesting. You said that it's still booming, even with the interest rate rise this past year, and there were signs that this is supposed to be cracking a little bit, but yet I challenge you that you find a surveyor out there that's still not up to their ears in work, can't find people, long turnaround times. You're right. There's a lot to be done. So I guess that's part of the question is we do need to rebuild a lot of this stuff, and also with an eye to the future. How is the surveying profession really need to? How do we going to get involved and really get in front of all of this? Do you think?
Well, the classic thing is to identify where you want to be at your clients. You want to be visible to them. So that's like the practical, down to the ground area. Knowing your clients, being at the conferences where they are, being there with solutions when they ask, and we've talked about the classic infrastructure we're thinking about. There's the roads and the bridges we all see. There's the housing. We are desperately short of housing. So while that market, like you described, may be a little soft, maybe a lot soft depending where you are because of interest rates, that has to change, and it will.
Right.
We have a huge deficit of housing in this country, and especially in these metropolitan areas. But there's a part of infrastructure that we all use every day, is essential to where we are, has been forgotten about it for multiple generations, and that's power.
Right.
Where's our power coming from? We've relied on fossil fuels, on nuclear, for a long time. Those plants are old and getting on, but we can't rely on that any longer. Primarily climate change, but even if it is oil, do we want to be beholden to some far off part of the world? The oil and fossil fuels, they're fungible. Yes, we're as big a producer, if not bigger than Saudi Arabia, but it's a global market. So we can't rely on our own production. We cannot rely on fossil fuels. So there's security, energy security, and then there's also climate change. We have to upgrade our network anyway. It is generations old, and it's time. And that's been one of the markets we've seen a lot here in New York, being one of the leaders in offshore wind, New York, New Jersey, and seeing that as a big market, and it's coming.
Well, and I guess what the other interesting thing is that, yes, while COVID and the younger generations have slowed down on repopulating, but yet we're still having a lot of people wanting to come to this country. So our population is growing. The major municipal centers like New York City and the greater New York City area, it's still growing. So obviously you're right. The power requirements are continuing to grow. And then in addition, I imagine it's got to be the same here. I saw this in Chicago. I'm seeing this around the D.C. area. I mean, we're also talking a significant amount of power needs for data centers and a lot of other really significant power users. You're right. We haven't fully addressed where that power is coming from and how secure and redundant that power is.
Yeah, it's part of the mix. We've talked about fossil fuels not going anywhere. It's still going to be part of our mix.
Right.
It's still going to be here till 2050, but we need more power just for normal organic growth. But we're asking all of our cars to be electric. They're more fun to drive. Okay, they wear out less, and they're going to make our air cleaner. And to boot, they're not going to add to climate change. So cars are just one small part of it.
Right. About
the electrification, the heating of our homes. Cooling of our homes, that's going to take more energy. industrial processes? Can we make cement kilns and others from power? So there's our organic growth that's going to happen, but we also we're transforming our economy into electrification.
Okay. Well, and I guess I want to make sure I get my news right. Did I not just hear something that new residential in New York now cannot be gas stoves?
I think it's in New York City. I believe that has been a local law. If it hasn't passed, it's about to.
Okay.
The same for New York State.
Yeah.
At some point forward, there's a big to do about it. But I think it's time to embrace the change. It's not, it's a slow change. But there's also the fact of the matter is, at this point, certainly Long Island, but in this area, there's even no more. Even if you wanted to keep building more, there's not enough capacity to bring that gas in.
Okay.
So you'd have to augment that capacity. I'm not sure the exact numbers. I know in Long Island that is more of an issue, but yeah, that is part of it. Is mandating electrification.
Oh wow. So, all right. So I guess what are some of the things that you're aware of that are being done? Like I said, you talked about offshore power. I guess I'm curious, knowing that throughout the country we've got wind farms, we've got solar farms, we've got some geothermal. What is going on in New York, and what's being planned for future renewables in the New York City, greater New York City area and along the East Coast?
Yeah, I think the big news is we have this amazing resource right at our doorstep. That's offshore wind. Planning, wind farms, massive turbines. The turbines that can be out in the ocean are significantly larger than the ones you would see over land. The wind's steadier, stronger. And you're not going to see them from the shore. They're 17, 20 more miles out. So
okay.
It's not something you're readily going to be able to see. So there's tremendous power out there. I think there's an announcement coming out. We're looking at I think 54 gigawatts has been planned as of today. It was a note that came out. New York, New Jersey are leading that. Recently went to IPF in Baltimore, where Maryland announced a big lease agreement. Massachusetts is big. Maine is on that. North Carolina as well. It's a great resource, and that's so important because while the Boston to Washington megalopolis, right? It is actually a very small area. It's only 2% of the land mass of the United States, but it's responsible for 20% of the GDP. So there's immense power needs, load here, and to generate a significant portion of it, certainly not all of it, right offshore is a very compelling case.
All right. But I got to ask you, okay, I'm John Q. Public, and I'm hearing surveyors saying we're advocating to be part of this. It's out in the middle of not in the middle. It's offshore. There are turbines and transmission lines coming in. Why do surveyors need to be engaged in this? I mean,
excellent question. And I looked at it too in the news. I'm like, oh, that's cats out in the ocean. And not something I really do worried about. You plant a stick in the ground and run a cable out there. Well, that is very true. But dig a little deeper, and we're talking about billions and billions of dollars being invested here. We're not even staking. We're not staking anything out. We're not doing any land transfers out in the ocean. These are leases from the federal government. But here's what happens. We are a part of the ecosystem. That cable comes onto land, and when it comes onto land, that is incredibly valuable property.
Yes.
So the surveyors become very important. Where are the property? And then I just mentioned this incredibly dense area. Well, there's a lot of people there, which means there's a lot of existing utilities.
Yes, right.
So those are very valuable, and for every dollar you spend on surveying where the utilities are, you have a payback of 10 of not hitting something,
right.
and redesign fees. So that's what we've seen is the wind majors are very keen. Where are the existing utilities? A lot of it's going to be buried underground, these cables that come in. So that's definitely a part of it. That's the mapping, the putting things in. It is a small piece of the overall budget, but in terms, these are crumbs coming off of a giant cake, are huge for surveyors.
Well, I would agree that it makes a lot of sense. Like you said, that ground, no matter where that transmission line's coming in or make landfall, that's some expensive ground. It's going to be a vital role of putting it where it belongs, putting it in. I guess that goes along with a lot more of the role of the surveying profession needs to take within improving our infrastructure is a lot more mapping. It's a lot more being part of the process of the upgrades, but also going back and being able to map stuff we've never mapped before, because there's a lot of infrastructure in the ground we don't know where it's at.
It is very true. That is very true. So take that the next step forward. So now you've come to what's called the interconnection, where you're meeting a substation. That is the huge bottleneck that we have right now. It's right. Easy enough to build solar, to build wind farms, battery storage, but the grid that holds it together we haven't invested in generations. It's very difficult. That's the bottleneck. The most serious part is how do we get this power and how do we transmit it around? So those are more corridors, more substations. So we're just talking the corridor. All of those mean surveys.
Right.
Take it another step forward. You're talking about revitalizations. There's a lot of more need now in the ports. New manufacturing facilities means a new site development. More training centers, new site development. We're bringing in wind blades. They have to come in. New London's going to have a huge wind blade facility for storage. That has to be surveyed. That has to be done. So there's all these knock-on effects that keep on going, that this huge private and mostly public, there's a seed money, but huge private investment into this, that money keeps going. It has to be fed. There's a whole ecosystem that feeds this electrical infrastructure.
Exactly. Well, and I think that's part of what the public doesn't even realize as far as surveying goes. When we're talking about wind farms, solar farms, geothermal throughout the country, and how big of a role the surveyor plays in all of that. And it's not just, like you just said, where the turbine goes. It's all the transmission lines. It's all of the collections. It's all running it to the substations. It's then putting it into the grid. All that's got to be placed somewhere on someone's property, and it really needs to be mapped effectively. And we've got to keep much better records about where stuff is at as well.
Well, that's a much bigger question. At that same assembly, I had somebody she'd come from Australia, and as I'm sure you can account with FIG coming up, how the rest of the world goes about managing their records and utilities and properties bears little resemblance to what we have, and I certainly some of what we have is. It's nothing to crow about. But that being said, it's our system. It's actually can be good for surveyors, and I think surveyors have a profound role, a very important role to play. We bring a lot of skills to the table, understanding the land, what's there. We have a lot of skills, and because there's so many people coming in, we're used to an RFP from an engineer who's dealt with us before. We want this level of accuracy, map this datum, that course, survey parcel 1, 2, 3. Okay, there you go. It's like a pizza order. We can price it. We're getting some proposals. We're going to go 150 miles, and we think it's 600 parcels. Give us a price. Mm-hmm. That's all we got, and we got a KMZ file. So now you've got to put on your consultant hat as well, which maybe some surveyors aren't as comfortable with, but it's very much in our wheelhouse. Okay, tell us about your property. Right. What do you need? What are the constraints? How do you want us to help you achieve that? And then here are some solutions.
I like where you're going with all this, because yes, we are going to have to take a strong step back as a nation and make sure that the money gets spent on infrastructure. We do look ahead for our upgrading our power, but there's only so many surveyors. And yes, it's going to be the age-old thing. We're still looking for people. We're still looking for capacity. And while we think we're making small inroads, it's not going to increase by 50% overnight anytime soon. So I guess part of my question would be, does the surveying profession, are we going to have to pivot from maybe not so much all the private stuff and maybe have to put that a little bit aside because the public stuff has to get done. I mean, at some point in time, this has to be worked on. This has to be engaged, and this has to be upgraded. And I don't think it'll necessarily, do anything bad to the economy by telling the private side to stand down a little bit, but we really do need to address the public side.
Yeah, you're absolutely right, Tim. And I don't think anybody has the answers. But first of all say is, depending what's important. Well, if you're buying a house, that's very important to you. And it's very important to get that survey. So to a residential owner, it may seem like, it's not that important to survey. It's just simple. That's somebody's house, and that's somebody's biggest investment that they've ever made.
Right.
So, and certainly the bank is very keen on what's going there. So is the title company. So I think that's both are very important. And I want to use the phrase, maybe it's cliche, but what got us here is not going to get us there. And what's gotten us here is knowing the land, being very good at what we do. Sometimes a little too good, right? We've all known surveyors spend a little too much time around getting down to that 100th or half a 100th,
right,
chasing out that deed out 200 years. But that's what we do. That's our core competence. That's what's got us here. A respected, noble profession. So the question is, what's going to get us there? What's going to get us with the people that we have? We only have so many people. We're graying out. We have some coming in. You met some of them today,
yes,
but not enough. The technology is only going to get us far. So it's a question. What's going to get us there? These have to be done. Houses have to be bought and sold. We're a part of that process. Mapping for these high-value projects, they have to be done. What's going to get us there? Does it mean rethinking how we do work, further embracing of technology? Is it saying, all right, maybe a desktop survey, that whole concept, that's enough to get you started until you decide on a route or you have a better idea? There's all these factors. I think it's going to be some huge combination. I think as surveyors, we have to look at ourselves, myself very much included. We got our experience, we know what we're doing, but maybe it's time to kind of set that aside a little bit, think about what our client needs and what they're going to get done and what's maybe good enough, or maybe no, you really need to spend time
right,
getting to half a 100th on this particular thing, because this area right here, this is critical.
Well, I like where you're going with that maybe it becomes, hate to say this, I'll probably get smacked by some of my longtime contemporaries, maybe it needs to be thought out more like an engineering plan, and that we do have a 20% review that is real quick and basic from a planning standpoint. Like you said, until it gets to that point where it has to be Nat's ass, then maybe like you said, maybe it's a desktop survey of some sort. And I guess that's one good thing about the future versus the past. All the old mapping, all the old parcel maps, a lot of that stuff was just digitized. It wasn't digital. And so maybe with some of the information going forward, maybe we can do some more due diligence, more effective due diligence to help with some of that. I would hope we could. So, I don't know.
Big questions, Tim. And we could go on. Those are a whole new, the whole records thing and what we want to do. We could sit here for hours and talk about it. But I'm super excited about the future. I think surveyors have a very important key role to play. I think it's putting on a new hat, identifying the new market. This won't be the only one. There's going to be,
right,
you caught me on a day when the news is about power and offshore wind, but there will be lots of other things. They're not making any more land.
Right.
And it will only become more valuable and more important for a surveyor to be involved.
And for the most part, and like I said, these heavily populated areas, New York's, the Chicago's, people really aren't leaving. So it's only
contrary to public opinion.
Yes. People
have written the obituaries, New York is dead, many times over and over again. And we're sitting in the shadow of Brooklyn Bridge and the World Trade Center. People thought for 9/11, that's it, New York City's over. But it came back, COVID hit, and New York City's over, and we're coming back. So I think the future is urban, and this is where the growth is going to continue to be.
I think it is too. So, well, thank you for this. I think this, like you said, I think this puts a pin in some stuff we can put up on the bulletin board and go, hey, you know what? These are some things we need to be thinking about. And we can't really, the surveying profession has to live beyond the end of its nose because there are brighter days ahead for a lot of things. We got to be ready, and we've got to be out in front of it.
We got to be ready.
So thank you for your insights, because
You're welcome.
You were spot on with, like you said, what worked before isn't going to work going forward, and I like that. I like that a lot. So, all right, well, that'll wrap us up for here in New York City. Thank you, Lem. Thanks to the college for hosting us, and we appreciate it. Be watching. Lem and I have got a whole bunch of topics that we want to hit on in the next few months. So make sure and subscribe, hit that like button wherever you listen, and we'll talk to you soon. Thanks. You've been listening to the Surveyor Says podcast, brought to you by the National Society of Professional Surveyors. If you have any questions about today's episode or any other topic, please email us at info@nsps.us.com, and we are here to help. Visit our website, nsps.us.com, to learn more about our association, the programs we administer and support, our sustaining members, and information about future episodes of Surveyor Says. Subscribe to the podcast on iTunes, Apple Podcasts, Google Play, iHeartRadio, Spotify, as well as our podcast host, Podbean. And remember, it's a great day to be a surveyor.